Everybody, how's it going? It's me, Logan Joyce, aka Suburban Yinzer, and right here I'm at Fort Ligonier in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania. Well, Ligonier, PA. This is a reproduction of what the fort would have looked like in the prime of its day in 1758 to 1766. That is the lifespan of Fort Ligonier. This is a French and Indian stronghold, so that during the French-Indian War, this fort was present. So it is a British fortification during the French-Indian War, as I said. The fort served as a staging area for General John Forbes, 1707 to 1759. His expedition was July 1758 to November 1758. So John Forbes, what he wanted to do was complete the mission that General Edward Braddock was not able to complete in 1755. The objective of the British, of the British government, was to expand farther west and take the Point, present-day Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Their objective was to take Fort Duquesne from the French and establish a British stronghold in order to claim the Three Rivers. You claim the Three Rivers, as I said many times. Whatever empire claims the Three Rivers on the Point basically controls North America. That is the objective of the British government. So John Forbes, his mission is to take the Point from the French. So, as I said, during the 8 years, 1758 to 1766, this was the lifespan of Fort Ligonier, and it was a garrison. And it was never taken by an enemy of the British government. It was never taken. And so this fort was a staging area here in the western part of the colony of Pennsylvania. And so the reason why this fort was built, and the reason why many forts were built in the western part of Pennsylvania, going further into the west, closer to Pittsburgh, because General John Forbes and the British government wanted to have, let's just say, headquarters or fortifications or staging areas, so the British could then establish a stronghold on their path or on their road to the Point in Pittsburgh, or modern day Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So going further, it served as a post of passage during Pontiac's War. So not only was this a staging area, but this was also a place where the British would be able to respond to threats in the surrounding area. So if something were to happen, so let's just say that the British were under attack in some distant part of wherever, the British would be able to communicate with the stronghold, and they would be able to say, hey, we're having a problem at, let's say, this part of the area. So the British would be able to respond and send a couple regiments of foot to that area down Forbes Road to be able to control the situation and fight off the enemy. So it was a vital link to communication and supply lines. Not only was this a stronghold for defense, but it was also a place where the British Army in general would be able to converge for communication and supplies. So supply trains would come here, dump their supplies, and also communications, meaning that back then they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have email, they weren't naturally, you weren't able to communicate 1, 2, 3. You had to send a rider, a messenger to this fortification to be able to respond and say, hey, send messages saying, hey, we're under attack. Send guys to this position, or this is what's going on in the further or in the distant areas. Regardless, it was attacked twice and besieged by the Native Americans prior to the decisive victory at Bushy Run on August 5th and 6th, 1763. The fort was decommissioned from active service in 1766, but by 1758, General John Forbes was assigned the daunting task of seizing Fort Duquesne at the Point. He ordered construction of a new road across Pennsylvania, guarded by a chain of fortifications. The final link being, quote, the post at Loyalhanna, 50 miles from his objective being Fort Duquesne, modern day the Point in Pittsburgh. So this was originally called Loyalhanna, but then it was further named Fort Ligonier. We're going to go further into the video about why it was called Fort Ligonier. So as we move this way, this structure, the fortification itself, was impenetrable. Not impenetrable per se, not complete impenetrable, but it was a huge stronghold. Going all the way back to European fortification styles, this was an impressive piece of architectural engineering at the time. If you want to talk about a stronghold, you want to talk about a deterrence, this is it. And in the colonial days, in the primitive colonial days, this was a force to be reckoned with. This was basically to show all Indian forces, all French and Indian forces in the area, we are here to stay. We are the crown of Great Britain. We are the British government, and we are here to control and dominate this region. So John Forbes was born in 1707 in Dunfermline, Scotland, and he died in 1759 in Philadelphia, the colony of Pennsylvania. And this fort was constructed in September of 1758. But by late October, George Washington had arrived at Loyalhanna, and the loyal defense of Loyalhanna from French attack occurred on October 12, 1758, also known as the Battle of Fort Ligonier. Heavily outnumbered and losers in Indian diplomacy, the French abandoned Fort Duquesne, which John Forbes occupied on November 25th. So after the, let's just say, I'm not going to say it was a small battle here at Fort Ligonier, but after the battle, about a month later, in November, the French and Indian allied forces, the Ohioan forces, found out that the British stronghold, which was Fort Ligonier, and the British, let's just say, the British in general, their huge influence in this area, they were moving further west. And the French and Indian forces knew in Fort Duquesne and the surrounding area, they knew that the British were coming. They knew that the British were here to stay, and they knew they were going to drive them out. Because Secretary of State William Pitt, his new administration, he knew that what he had to do was be stronger and be more radical in his resistance against French control of this area and this region. So he was being more radical in telling British forces, push farther and farther west as far as you can and drive the French out of this area. This is going to be controlled by the British government. So John Forbes designated the site Pittsburgh, what we call today as Pittsburgh, in honor of Secretary of State William Pitt, 1708 to 1778. Forbes also named Loyalhanna Fort Ligonier after his superior, Field Marshal Sir John Ligonier, 1680 to 1770, Commander-in-Chief in Great Britain. So right here, the battle occurred, like I said, October 12, 1758. While this fort was still under construction, the Battle of Fort Ligonier was fought. By September, Forbes advanced force about 1,500 men under the command of Henry Bouquet, 1719 Roll, Switzerland, 1765 Pensacola, Spanish Florida, began construction of the fort for the purpose of establishing winter quarters. The belligerents. French and Colony of Canada, Commander Capitaine Charles Philippe Aubray, strength 440 troupes de la marine and militia, and 150 Delaware Indians. Total 590 men for the French. Great Britain and British America, Commander Colonel James Byrd, strength 2,000 plus regulars and militia. They lost 12 men, 18 wounded, and 31 missing during the Battle of Fort Ligonier. So the strength of 590 French and Indian men attacked Fort Ligonier, but were repulsed easily. This strength of Fort Ligonier repulsed the 590 men, French and Indians, from this position. The French were very desperate because Fort Duquesne's supply lines were being depleted. Fort Duquesne was being starved. So they needed to raid this fort raid the farther area to be able to get supplies and food for Fort Duquesne. But while raiding this, they realized that this was a daunting task. They were desperate. And militia forces and regular British forces were able to easily repulse the French and the Indians out of this, just say, fortification based on the artillery and the marksmanship of colonial militia. And the French forces had to retreat out of this area October 12, 1758. But regardless, in conclusion, right now I'm here at Fort Ligonier, and it is an honor and a privilege to be here 20 years after I first visited here when I was a little kid, since 2005. Can you believe that? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk further into the fort and maybe show you about what the inside of the fort looks like. But anyway, that was just the general background of the history of Fort Ligonier and the French-Indian War. But anyway, see you in the fort.